Hi, everyone. Hope you're having a great week and continue to be blessed by your time in the world. I want to circle back and talk about Leviticus again. I know we talked about it last week, and I tried to kind of help us situate the book of Leviticus into the broader story of the Bible to help show us and remind us that we're not just kind of slogging through a bunch of rules and lists, but this is a part of the story. That there was this crisis where the temple was built, but no one could enter it. God wanted to dwell among his people, but it seemed like that was not possible. And Leviticus kind of helps show us the way that God is going to dwell in the midst of his people again. It's a part of a story. It's so much more than just a bunch of rules about sacrifice and purity. But one of the reasons I think Leviticus is hard for us to wrap our minds around in many cases is because we see the world very differently from the ancient people, the ancient Israelites. We live in a world that tends to divide the material and the spiritual. We divide religion and science. These are kind of two different realms in many of our minds as modern day people. But this would not have been the case for the people of Leviticus. In their day, God was working behind everything. And if you needed something, if there was a problem in your town, if you wanted rain to fall from the sky, you would pray, you would sacrifice, you would plead with God. There weren't these kind of divisions that we've created in our modern world between the material and the spiritual. God was in and through everything. And I think we would be better served to kind of recapture that. Again, we live in a very secularized world where we've demystified just about everything. And again, I think we'd be better off recapturing that. The ancient people realized that God could work through animals that were killed, through blood that would be spread, through cups and bowls, through tents, right? And that all of that had significance. And it was more. The tabernacle was more than just a building. That God was there and he was active. And so they saw a world when they looked out in which God was behind and through in everything. And again, maybe it would be good for us to recapture a little bit of that. And that was the world that they lived in. And I would like, though, to touch a little bit more on some important parts of the story as we continue to read along. I mentioned that first crisis about how the book of Exodus tells us Moses can't enter the temple, but there's actually a couple more crises that enter into the story that kind of spur things along. And the next one comes in Leviticus chapter 10. And that's where we read about the death of Nadab and Abihu, Aaron's sons. And what we read there in the beginning of the chapter is that they took their censers, put fire in them, and added incense, and they offered unauthorized fire before the Lord, contrary to his command. Now, we're not actually quite sure what that unauthorized fire was, but they were doing something that God hadn't commanded, right? They were trying to forge their own path and go their own way. And so what does God do? He strikes them dead. And then there in the holy place, what you have is death. And the holy place was meant to be a place of life. And suddenly death has come in where God did not want it, right? So many of these rules and regulations were meant to purify the temple, and here suddenly it's been defiled. And so what you see happen is that in the next few chapters 10 then through 17, are all having to do with purity and cleanliness. And God is saying, look, you guys messed it up again. You brought death into a place of life, so let me show you. I'm going to have to lay this out here, how you're going to keep yourself clean, to restore and to keep the life that I have for you. A little bit later on, there's another crisis that enters in the story. This is in chapter 17, and that's where we read in verse 7 of chapter 17 that God tells the people that they are no longer to offer any of their sacrifices to the goat idols to whom they prostitute themselves. Now, again, that's kind of a cryptic thing too. We don't know a lot about what's happening there. It's just kind of mentioned once, but clearly, God's people are not totally faithful and allegiant to him. They're offering idols to goats. And so what you see then is a new section of Leviticus, that lasts from chapter 17 through the end of the book, where God is telling his people how to live their daily life. And so there's a number of rules and laws and ordinances on how to just be one of his children. And that all stems because they haven't gotten it. They don't know how to be his children because they're sacrificing to goat idols. And so each of these three main sections of the book of Leviticus, the first section, which lasts the first 9 chapters or so, explains or helps make sense out of how God is going to dwell amongst an unholy people. And so it outlines all the sacrifices that need to be made. And then when the unauthorized fire comes in through Nadab and Abihu, what does God do? He says, I'm going to tell you, after you mess this up again, how to cleanse and purify yourself. And then after they don't know how to live with God because they sacrificed to goat idols, God says, let me show you how to live with me, how to be my people, right? It's not just a collection of rules. It's a story of God drawing his people to himself, of setting them apart as holy, right? Making them his people, and an important part of the overarching story too. Well, don't give up. Keep going in the book of Leviticus, and I look forward to being back with you all next week. God bless you.